It was a morning like any other in the small town. The sun began to spread slowly on the sidewalks, while the movement gradually took over the central square. And there, in the most discreet corner, near the shadow of a flamboyant old man, was she. A cloth spread on the floor, a half-worn wicker basket, and on it small brownies, all made by small and skilled hands, but too callous for their age. The girl was no more than 10 years old. Her hair, always tied up anyway, carried the smell of the gas stove from which her delicacies came out. His eyes were large, attentive, full of silent courage. She had no father. He had no mother. There was no one, only her, the crumpled notebook with the recipes she learned by herself, and a strength that few people in the world would have. I woke up before the sun and slept after the last brownie was sold. It was with the money of the day that he bought what he was going to eat for dinner. If there was any left over, he never complained. He never cried in public. To those who looked from afar, perhaps it looked more like a child playing at being a saleswoman. But there was no joke there. There was urgency. There was struggle. She didn't ask. I never asked. He had learned early on that the world didn't give anything for free, and that every penny that went into that basket was earned with effort, sweat, and dignity. Whoever bought a candy got more than one flavor. She took with her a piece of the hope of that girl who, even alone, refused to give up. She didn't hide, but she didn't attract attention either. He stood there, smiling in the corner, humbly offering the sweets he prepared with so much care. It was visible that she tried to maintain a firm appearance, even when hunger was pressing or when the heat was unbearable. Her shoes, already small and worn, barely protected her feet, but she didn't complain. I had learned to silence the pain, not out of weakness, but out of survival. Every person who passed by and didn't look, every look of contempt or indifference, was another lesson in endurance. No one knew his name. No one asked. For most, she was just the candy girl. But for her, that was the identity she had managed to build with the little that fate had allowed her. And as harsh as the reality was, there was still a twinkle in her eyes when someone complimented her brownie. It was as if, for a brief moment, she felt seen. I felt that I was alive. Who, perhaps, was on the right track, even without having anyone by his side, even without knowing if he would have a place to sleep the next night. She was always in the same place, almost as if that piece of the square was his refuge. He knew the busiest times, the faces of regular customers, and even the stray dogs that prowled around. It was all part of his silent routine. He knew exactly how many sweets he needed to sell to be able to buy a bag of rice. She knew how much gas cost and how much longer the small cylinder of the boarding house could last, where she was sometimes allowed to sleep. Every penny counted. And that's why she didn't waste smiles or kindness. She was a saleswoman. But she was also a child trying to survive in a world that seemed to have forgotten her. Despite the hardness, there was a tenderness in the way she arranged her sweets. The cloth was always clean, the brownies lined up with care, the colorful molds that she recycled from old donations. She knew the look mattered. She knew she needed to get attention, without seeming desperate. There was something beautiful about that effort, something noble in that silent attempt to remain dignified, even when everything seemed against her. What few knew is that at night, after selling the last candy, she used the leftovers to feed the stray dogs. And he did it smiling, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This girl, so small, so fragile in the eyes of others, carried an almost supernatural strength, because even after so many no's, so many closed doors, so many nights of hunger and fear, she still believed she could win, that she could one day have a different life, a little corner of her own, a kitchen full of ingredients, a showcase full of sweets made with love and freedom. She dreamed, and that was what kept her standing. That day, everything looked the same. Another day of strong sunshine, another morning of hard work. She had woken up even earlier to prepare the sweets, trying to use the last ingredient she had. She was excited. He had managed to make a larger batch. And deep down, I believed that maybe that day would be better, that he would sell everything, maybe even before noon. But what she didn't know is that something unexpected was about to happen, something that would completely change the course of his story, Something that would begin not with applause, but with the worst form of rejection, public humiliation, before continuing. If you've come this far and this story has touched your heart in some way, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot to continue bringing stories like this. As the days passed, the square became a constant stage of resistance. It was there, among the concrete benches and the dry trees, that she faced a world with more courage than many adults had ever dared to have. He woke up before the city woke up, often not knowing if he would be able to sell enough to eat or pay the makeshift pension where he slept. Even so, he got up. He filled the basket with the sweets prepared the night before and set foot on the road, walking miles, with the same leaky shoes that no longer protected him from the hot ground or the puddles of cold water when it rained. The path to the square was not easy. There were slopes, potholes, hurried cars, and people who didn't even notice her presence. But the worst was yet to come when she finally settled into her usual corner. She spread the cloth carefully, arranged the sweets as if it were a magic window made by a girl who just wanted a chance. And there he stayed for hours, in silence, waiting. The day did not always bring customers. Sometimes I would stay there from morning until nightfall without selling a brownie. Even so, he did not budge. He knew that if he left empty-handed, there would be no dinner. The sun, often merciless, punished his thin skin. The heat made the chocolate and the candies melt prematurely, spoiling part of production. And when the rain fell, and it fell without warning, there was no shelter. He ran to protect the basket with his own body, curling up under any marquee, while the water took over the cloth on the floor. It was in these moments that loneliness weighed the most. But she didn't let discouragement take over. Even wet, cold, hungry, she would return the next day. Because stopping was not an option. Some people were passing by in a hurry, looking away. Others, on the contrary, looked too much, with judgment, with contempt, as if selling candy was some kind of affront. There were days when hearing harsh phrases hurt more than hunger. People who said that she was getting away, that that square was no place for children, that she should go home, as if she had won. Some made fun of the sweets, laughed at the improvised way of the presentation. Others, the worst, tried to take advantage. They asked for a discount, tried to pay with coins that did not even add up to the fair value. They thought that because she was a girl, alone, she would accept anything. But no, she knew the value of what she did. I knew how much each ingredient cost, each hour of preparation. She knew that, even as a child, her dignity was not for sale. There were, however, those brief, almost imperceptible moments that gave breath, like when a lady smiled and said that the sweets were delicious, or when a child dragged his parents to the basket asking for a brownie. At those times, her eyes sparkled in a way that words can't explain. It was as if, for a moment, the whole world recognized the effort she made. But these moments were rare. Most of the time, she was invisible. The security guards at the square did not bother her at first. Maybe because she was so quiet, so discreet, that she barely seemed to be there. But as the days passed and the movement increased, they began to see his presence as a problem. It was as if a child selling candy threatened the order of public space. She began to be watched from afar, then discreetly warned. They told her not to stay too long, not to dirty the floor, not to let it get in the way of people's circulation. She listened in silence, picked up the cloth, walked to the shade of the next tree, started all over again. Even with all the obstacles, he never stopped being there. I never stopped trying. His face, even marked by fatigue, always carried a slight smile. It wasn't real joy, it was resistance, a way of saying that she had not yet been defeated. Her eyes, as much as they saw so much contempt, still held a remnant of hope. It was as if she believed that, in the middle of that cold world, there was still some goodness capable of changing her life. Time went by. The sweets, as good as they were, did not guarantee stability. On some days, she had to choose between buying ingredients or eating. In others, he couldn't even sleep under a roof. And even so, he showed up the next day with a basket in hand, as if nothing had happened. The survival instinct moved her, but there was something more. A dream that she never told anyone. A silent desire to have her own kitchen, with ingredients at will, with a new oven, with full cabinets. She dreamed of a space where she could make her sweets in peace, without fear, without running from anyone. As difficult as it was, she did not give up, not out of pride, but because stopping would be the same as accepting that the world has won. And she, even at such a young age, had already understood that, for those who are born with nothing, resisting is an act of courage. Each candy he sold was one more step in this fight. Each coin received was a small victory. But no matter how hard he tried, the square was not a safe place. And on that particular day, while she was packing her basket as usual, something happened that would change everything. An event that would not only mark his life forever, but also reveal just how cruel and unexpected the world could be. And it was exactly at that moment, with the sun high and the square starting to fill up, that everything got out of control. She didn't even have time to understand what was happening. He was there, his hands still damp from the cloth he used to arrange the sweets, when he saw the two men approaching. They came in hard, heavy steps, as if they were already arriving with a decision made. They didn't even look her in the eye. One of them pointed to the basket and said in a harsh voice that she should get out of there immediately. The other added, with contempt in his voice, that this place was not for people like her. The square, which until then had been a small refuge, suddenly turned into a field of attack. There was no conversation, no chance for explanation. When she tried to say that she wasn't disturbing anyone, that she was just there to sell her brownies and get to eat, the response was a dry push. His legs wobbled. The basket slipped out of his hands and fell to the floor, scattering the brownies. All the effort of the night before mixed with dirt, grass, and indignation. The people around stopped, some out of curiosity, others out of discomfort, but almost none out of compassion. It was as if they were seeing something ordinary. A child being pushed, his candy trampled on, his face stained with shame, and yet no one moved. They just stared. Some even whispered, rolled their eyes, as if she was receiving it because she deserved it. That was a judgment that hurt the most. The look of someone who doesn't care. She crouched down to try to gather the candy from the floor, her hands shaking, her face warm and her eyes watering. But before he could save anything, one of the security guards kicked the cloth, spreading the crushed candies even more. He said that if she didn't leave, he would call the police. And that's when the pain turned to despair. Not because he was afraid of the police themselves, but because at that moment he felt it was a problem, a nuisance, someone who needed to be removed, as if their mere presence offended the environment, as if selling candy was a criminal act. She cried. Not a loud, scandalous cry. It was a contained, silent cry, the kind of pain that is swallowed because one has learned too soon that there is no point in screaming. The tears flowed uncontrollably as she collected what she could, trying to save at least a few bucks that were still in the basket. And yet, with every movement, the security guards pressed her as if they wanted to erase her from there as quickly as possible. In the background, a mother passed by pulling a child by the hand. The child looked back, saw the candy on the floor, and wanted to get closer. But the mother quickened her pace, as if she were protecting her son from something dangerous. This gesture was recorded. It was there that she understood that it was not only the square that rejected her. It was the idea that a poor child, dirty with dirt, selling candy on the floor, was a symbol of what no one wanted to see. It was easier to ignore than to face it. With her hands dirty and her pride crushed, she stood up. She was alone. No one offered to help. No voice was raised to defend it. And at that moment, the square once known became hostile. It was the same ground, the same trees, the same benches. But now everything seemed cold, sharp. The space that once housed his hope has turned into enemy territory. She left slowly, with her steps heavy and her heart even more. I didn't know exactly where to go. The basket, now nearly empty, dangled on his arm as a cruel reminder of humiliation. The little that was left did not even pay for dinner. But worse than hunger was a bitter taste that remained in the soul. The feeling of being pushed not only physically, but emotionally, as if the world screamed that she didn't belong anywhere. As he crossed the street, he looked back. He saw the candies crushed on the floor, the dirty cloth thrown aside, the security guards already resuming their round, as if nothing had happened. It was as if she had never been there, as if that moment of pain, that harsh scene, had left no trace. But inside her, something had changed. That day was like a rupture, an invisible break that separated childhood from brute reality. She left a piece of herself in that square, not just the sweets, but also some of the innocence that was left. He walked in silence, his eyes burning, trying not to let the revolt overcome what was still left of hope. He even considered not coming back. Throw away the basket, abandon the sweets, forget the effort of each dawn mixed with condensed milk and flour. But life, for her, never gave her many options. Even wounded, I knew I needed to continue, because no one would do it for her. Because to depend on pity was the same as to accept the next humiliation. Her stomach growled, thirst burned, but still, she kept walking, looking for somewhere where she could remake herself, breathe, think about how to start over. The body hurt, but what weighed most was the shame. Not because she was expelled, but because she was treated as something disposable, for having been pushed in the eyes of everyone, and not having found a single look of support. The memory of that day was engraved strongly, and even if time passed, even if other battles came, she would never forget the feeling of being swept out of the square, as if it were garbage. But it was at that moment, between tears and stumbling steps, that something happened. An unlikely meeting, an unexpected gesture, and for the first time in a long time, something different flashed on the horizon. It wasn't a certainty, it wasn't a promise, but it was the beginning of a subtle change, one of those that we almost don't notice, but that has the power to transform everything. What seemed to be just another cruel episode of life on the streets, a pain that would pass in silence like so many others, began to transform in an unexpected way. As she walked, trying to digest the humiliation and balance the little that was left of her sweets, a silent movement began to take shape in the networks. The video, captured almost by chance, brought a raw, uncut record of the entire scene. The abrupt arrival of security guards, the sweets falling to ground, the suppressed crying, the silence of the surrounding crowd. A tough, real, and impossible to ignore sequence. There were no effects, soundtrack, or dramatization. It was a truth wide open, a fragile girl being treated like a nuisance. The caption was short but powerful enough to make it across the screen. This girl just wanted to sell candy. And that was enough. The video, published without great pretensions, found fertile ground in the sensitivity of those who still allow themselves to feel. Within hours, reactions began to pop. First there were some shy likes, then came the indignant, emotional, curious comments. And, like a spark that meets dry straw, the content went viral. Every minute more people saw it, shared. They marked friends. They asked who that girl was, where she was, how they could help. The image of his teary eyes, the empty basket, the dirty cloth, and the crushed sweets on the floor, that touched something deep in those who watched. It was not just another sad story. It was the exposed pain of those who only wanted to work and were treated as invisible. It was a portrait of inequality shoved right in everyone's face, and no one could pretend they didn't see it. Meanwhile, she still walked the streets without knowing anything. He still held the empty basket, not imagining that, in another dimension of reality, the digital world, his story was becoming a symbol of something much bigger. The wind beat down her face and fatigue consumed her, but there was an energy in the air that she didn't understand. Something was changing, slowly, deeply. Profiles with thousands of followers began to republish the video. Online newspapers copied the content and gave impactful headlines. Aid groups mobilized. Comments of revolt and commotion multiplied. People saying that that girl could be your daughter, your sister, your neighbor. And perhaps that was the point. She represented thousands of children who live on the margins, struggling in silence, swallowing their pain so as not to lose hope. And suddenly, she was no longer just the candy girl. It has become a symbol, a collective cry, an uncomfortable question. How long will we close our eyes? The images of his humiliation echoed everywhere, provoking the most diverse reactions. While some demanded justice and dignity, others wanted to know how to find her, wanted to offer support, a snack, a blanket, a word, anything that made her feel like she was not alone. The number of views increased at an absurd speed. The video had already crossed borders. Influencers from various parts of the country were talking about her. Some moved, others revolted, but all touched. It was as if, suddenly, the whole country had stopped to look at a single child, one that, until the day before, was ignored by everyone. The same one who was pushed and had her dreams trampled on was now the subject of conversation in circles of friends, radio programs, live broadcasts. Meanwhile, she was trying to find somewhere to rest. She sat on a bench, took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and stood there still. He did not yet know that something different was about to cross his path. She still didn't understand why some people looked at her more closely. He did not know that his face had already become known, not by the words, but by the silence in his eyes. The strength of that video was not only in the image itself, but in what it aroused. It was impossible to watch and go on with life as if nothing had happened. People who saw the video felt the pain stuck in their throats. It was like an uncomfortable mirror, showing how much indifference can hurt more than any push. And each view was like a new invitation. Do something. Look at this girl. Listen to what she's not saying. The video kept circulating. It reached aid communities, NGOs, institutions that work with children in vulnerable situations. A movement began to form. There was no leader, no central organization. It was as if, for the first time, everyone was uniting around something genuinely human. It was impossible to ignore that image. And even more impossible was not want to change what it represented. A few hours later, someone managed to locate the region where everything had happened. Comments began to emerge with clues about who she was. People said they had already seen her selling sweets in another square. Others said that she always showed up on Sundays with a basket on her arm and a discreet smile on her face. Small fragments of his history were being sewn together by strangers who, until then, had never cared. And the more the story took shape, the more the video gained strength. Offers of help began to appear. People willing to pay for their studies. Donating clothes, food, shelter. Some wanted to meet her, talk, hear what she had to say. Others just want to give her a hug, as if they wanted to symbolically repair the coldness she received that day. The repercussion reached local authorities. Those responsible for the square were charged, questioned, and, even in the midst of evasive answers and attempts to minimize what happened, the indignation did not cease. It was as if that video had opened up an old social wound, but one that everyone preferred to keep covered up. The difference is that, now, it was no longer possible to ignore it. She still didn't know she was being sought. He still had no idea that his story had already crossed screens and hearts. For her, the day was still just another losing battle. And perhaps this was the most beautiful detail of all. While the world was agitated because of her, she continued to be just who she was. A tired girl, with her feet hurting and her head full of uncertainty. But little by little, signs began to emerge. A man approached and offered a piece of bread with a gentle smile. A woman gave him a small bottle of water and said few words, but with sweetness in her eyes. And even without fully understanding it, she felt something different in the air. It was no longer the same indifference as always. Something had changed. And so, as the sun began to set and the day ended as it began, hot, hard, uncertain, a new energy began to take shape. An invisible thread connected that girl to thousands of strangers. And she still didn't even know how much it was about to change her life completely. But there was already something in her eyes. An almost imperceptible glow. A mixture of surprise and doubt, as if, for the first time, she was being noticed. As if the world, for a second, had remembered to look at her. And without knowing it, she was slowly walking towards something she could never imagine. Because the impact of that video was still just beginning to show its true strength. The likes multiplied like fire in dry grass. The video, recorded by chance, took on a life of its own. He left the groups of friends and family and invaded the big profiles. Famous personalities, who had never heard of that small town, shared the recording as if it were a cry of warning. It was impossible to watch without being moved. The camera trembled. The image was simple, but the feeling, this one overflowed. Here was a small, slight girl, facing the world with a box of candy in her hand and a dignity that no offense was able to erase. It was as if every second of that recording carried a silent reminder about empathy, about courage, about humanity. And so the wave began. A wave that grew, took shape, gained strength. In the comment boxes, appeals came from all sides. People asking for justice. People asking for her name. People wanting to do something. It wasn't just a pity. It was admiration. It was revolt. It was a desire to act. Questions began to arise in local groups. Does anyone know who this girl is? What school is she from? Does she live here? And at an almost magical pace, the answers began to emerge. A name, an approximate address, a simple school on the outskirts of the city, all shared with care, with zeal, with a feeling of protection. The video was no longer just a record. It was a call. Ordinary people had become good detectives, gathering clues to find her. And when, finally, her name came up, all eyes turned to her. The girl with braids who sold sweets to help around the house, who carried more maturity in her eyes than many people 3 times her age, became a symbol of silent resistance, of dignity in the midst of rejection, and more than that, of a reality that many pretend not to see. The movement on the networks was constant. Chains of support have sprung up on various platforms. Netizens created art with the image of the video. Hashtags began to appear. Emotional messages were reposted nonstop. Everything seemed to revolve around a single collective will to do something for her. A group of mothers organized a fundraiser. Young people set up an online campaign. Businessmen offered scholarships, cash donations. Even a renovation of the family home was considered. It was as if the country, tired of so much heavy news, had found in her a spark of hope, a reminder that there is still goodness, there is still compassion. The square where it all happened, previously forgotten and empty, was occupied by another energy. People started going there to leave messages. Flowers, toys. A graffiti with the girl's face appeared on a wall. Photographs of the moment when she tried to hold back her tears were transformed into illustrations with phrases of strength. In a short time, that square became a symbol of reunion with collective sensibility. It was no longer just a place. It was a living memorial of how much a story can touch hearts. The press, of course, was not left out. TV programs disputed who would interview her first. News sites published detailed stories, with headlines that tried to translate into words what the video had already shouted so clearly. "Girl who sold sweets moves Brazil," said one. "From humiliation to hope, the story that moved the country," read another. But nothing seemed to be more powerful than the very image of the girl walking alone, with her box in her hands, under the hard gaze of the one who had expelled her minutes before. The repercussion was not only emotional, it was practical. Real people started doing real things. A local businessman donated a new bicycle to make it easier for her to travel to school. Another offered training courses for the girl's mother. Donations arrived from all over Brazil. In a symbolic gesture, a bakery in the city started selling the same sweets she sold, with part of profit reverted to help the family's income. The streets of the city, previously indifferent to her presence, now seemed to recognize her with new eyes. The most curious thing was that, in the midst of so much movement, the girl herself did not seem to understand the dimension of what was happening. She continued with the same shyness in her eyes, the same quiet manner, as someone who is not used to spotlights. She did not seek fame, nor did she want recognition. "I just wanted to help my mother, pay the bills at home, continue my studies." But it was precisely the simplicity that made so many people connect with her story, because she didn't just represent herself. It represented thousands of invisible children who struggle in silence every day. Many of these children also came to be remembered. In the comments on the networks, people shared similar stories. "My son also sells candy at the traffic light. My niece goes through this every day. It reminded me of my mother's childhood." It was as if, when they saw her, they finally had the courage to tell their own pains. The girl's story not only touched, but awakened. It was a collective call to empathy. Influencers, artists, athletes, everyone wanted to participate in some way. Some sent video messages. Others organized lives to collect donations. A famous singer even dedicated an entire performance to her story, drawing tears from the audience. It was as if the force of narrative had broken through any social, cultural, or economic barrier. Because here was something that no fame could manufacture: truth. And this truth generated a domino effect. Schools organized lectures on empathy. Teachers used the video in classrooms to discuss bullying, inequality, and respect. Psychologists commented on the impact of exposure, but also on the importance of collective support. The city, usually going unnoticed, suddenly made headlines, and more than that, became an example. The messages kept coming. Letters were delivered in person. Children sent drawings. Gentlemen and ladies wrote by hand, thanking the girl for the lessons she had given to the country, not with words, but with attitude, with force, with dignity. Even the employee who had expelled her from the square received a flood of criticism, but also requests for reflection. Society did not want just one culprit. I wanted transformation, and this transformation began to spread, not only for her, not only for that city, but for everyone who watched the video and was touched by something bigger, by a sense of justice that sometimes seems dormant, but that still lives, hidden perhaps, but alive. And that's where that video woke up. And while all this was happening, as the eyes of the country turned to her, something much bigger began to form. An unexpected invitation, an opportunity that no one imagined, a twist that, if said out loud, would look like a movie story. But it was real, and it was already on its way. When they found the girl, she was sitting in a corner of the living room, with her eyes attentive, observing the unusual movement around. The family phone kept ringing. Knocks on the door had become routine. Neighbors, strangers, journalists. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone wanted to see up close that girl who, with a steady look and a box of sweets, had awakened a wave of solidarity throughout the country. But to her, it all seemed like a dream. A beautiful but strange dream, hard to believe. She was never used to this kind of attention, much less with such sincere hugs, with such affectionate words, with smiles that didn't ask for anything in return. Her eyes still carried the fear of someone who spent his life having to prove his own worth. Every gift he received, every gesture of support, was accompanied by a kind of contained astonishment, as if, in some corner of her mind, she still hoped that everything could disappear from one moment to the next. It was a reflection of years of being ignored, of closed doors, of looks that crossed her presence as if she were invisible. And now, suddenly, she was there, in the spotlight, being treated with a respect she had never experienced. It was on one of these visits that she met someone who would completely change the course of her story. A woman well-dressed with a serene smile, teary eyes. She had followed every detail of the video and was deeply moved. She was not just a spectator. She was an entrepreneur, owner of a chain of confectionaries that started from scratch and knew, like few people, what it was like to fight against the tide. When she looked at that girl, she saw a younger version of herself. And that's why he had no doubt. He made a direct invitation, bluntly. I wanted to help turn that little candy seller into a real pastry chef, a partner, an apprentice, a future owner of her own business. The girl didn't quite understand at first, not because she didn't want to, but because it exceeded the limits of what she had already dared to imagine. She knew how to make sweets, of course. It was with them that he got some change to help at home. But opening a confectionery? To have a space of her own? To have machines, utensils, uniforms? That seemed like something from a soap opera. But here was a woman saying that it was possible, and not as a favor. It was an opportunity, an open door, a bet on his talent, on his strength, on his value. The proposal was not just to deliver everything ready. It was walking alongside, teach whatever was necessary, show how to manage, how to create, how to sell fairly. The businesswoman promised guidance, logistical support, initial supply of supplies, even a team to help in the first months. It was a gift, yes, but also an investment in a promising future. Something that was born not only from commotion, but from a conviction that that girl with the right tools could go very far. The girl's mother cried silently, holding her daughter's hand tightly. He knew how hard they had fought to get there. He knew of the nights when everything but courage was lacking, of the days when the girl came back with the box still full, without selling almost anything, but with the same desire to try again. And now, after so long being ignored, they were there, being heard, seen, valued. The mothers looked at it all. It wasn't just relief. It was pride. In the days that followed, the girl began to frequent the company's headquarters. He learned about ingredients, techniques, organization. He discovered what a production schedule was, how to calculate the cost of brownie, the profit of a batch of brownies. Each discovery was received with a twinkle in the eye. She wanted to learn everything. He absorbed each explanation as if he had found a new world, a world where she was not a supporting actor. He was a protagonist. I created recipes, tested flavors, gave names to sweets. And little by little, he began to understand what it meant to have his own space, where his ideas could take shape. The community followed everything with enthusiasm. Social networks continued to be busy, but now the comments celebrated the new beginning. People didn't just want to see the girl win. They wanted to participate in this. And so, when the businesswoman announced that she was helping to set up the young confectioner's first confectionery, the whole city mobilized. Painters offered to take care of the walls. A local architect designed a simple but charming project. A retired couple donated a glass display case. Each corner of the space had a little piece of the community. It was as if everyone wanted to leave their mark there. On the day the facade received a sign with the name chosen by her, there was celebration. Simple, but full of emotion. A group of musicians showed up without warning and played on the sidewalk. Children crowded to see the candy girl up close, who now wore an apron and answered with shy but firm smile. It was as if, suddenly, the whole city had woken up to something bigger, for the importance of believing in the right people, of giving a real chance to those who carry the will to change their own destiny. Confectionery became more than a trade. It was a symbol, a place where customers didn't just go to buy candy. They went to remind themselves that dreams are possible, even when everything seems to say otherwise. They came to talk, to tell stories, to give thanks. And she listened attentively, always with that discreet way, but now with a twinkle in her eye that said, she knew where she was stepping, and he knew where he wanted to go. The success of the confectionery caught the attention of other entrepreneurs. A renowned chef from the capital sent a letter praising the sweets. He invited the girl to visit his kitchen. A TV program scheduled a visit. An NGO offered scholarships for a professional gastronomy course. Opportunities came from all sides, but she still had her feet on the ground. He knew that each step had to be firm, that there was no point in rushing. What he wanted, above all, was to do it well, learn calmly, grow consistently. The businesswoman who welcomed her proudly said that she had never seen someone so dedicated. It was as if everything that the girl had not had in affection and recognition, she now returned in the form of work, focus, delicacy in the details. Each brownie had a hint of gratitude. Each batch was a silent letter to those who believed in it. And little by little, that small space became a reference. Other young people began to be inspired. Street vendors, public school students, children who also helped at home. Her story showed that you didn't have to wait for the world to be fair. Sometimes all it took was one chance, an open door, an outstretched hand. And this was creating a movement. People began to get together to offer mentoring courses, free workshops. What was born from a moment of humiliation became the seed of a collective project of transformation. Even with so much happening, she did not fail to visit the square where it all began. I went there sometimes alone, took a bag of candy, and watched the movement. Not like before. Now it was different. She saw it with different eyes. And when she looked at the children sitting on the benches, with worn backpacks or leaky slippers, she knew that her story could be the starting point for so many others. And that was why something important was still missing. Something she herself was determined to do. At first, everything seemed too big. The girl, used to the simple routine of the streets, was now faced with something she had never dreamed of. Tiles being laid, bookshelves appearing where before there was only an empty space, and the entrance coming to life with colors that resembled a party. The walls of the future confectionery were painted in soft tones, with floral details reminiscent of the cloth napkins she used to wrap sweets in the past. The businesswoman made a point of including the girl in every decision, from the choice of the logo to the format of the windows. Nothing was done without listening to his opinion, and for the first time, she felt respected, valued, as if finally his voice had found space to echo. The donations kept coming. A couple of retired bakers donated an industrial oven. A man from the market gave away an old wooden table that, restored, became the main counter, and a neighbor, who passed by the square every day, offered her help to sew the aprons. The confectionery was not just hers, it was everyone's. Each corner carried a piece of the community. Each item had a story, a memory, a gesture of kindness. It was impossible not to be moved to see everything taking shape with such generosity around her. The name, Sweet Hope, was chosen with shy but firm smile. When asked why, she answered without hesitation, "Because it was hope that sustained me when there was nothing else." The sign was placed carefully, and that day she cried, not of sadness, but of a new feeling, a cry of conquest, of overcoming, of those who, even though they had so little, decided to believe in something bigger. And that something now was before his eyes, with the smell of cake coming out of the oven and the window being polished for the inauguration. During construction, she began to learn. Every day, someone taught something new: how to calculate the price of each product, how to deal with suppliers, how to maintain kitchen hygiene. Each recipe was a challenge, but also a discovery, and she wrote everything down in a flowery notebook, a gift from the businesswoman, with the cover written by hand, "Secrets of Sweet Hope." Inside, he wrote down measurements, mixtures, but also dreams. Dreams that, until then, seemed too distant. She learned about layer cakes, decorated pies, stuffed gingerbreads, and even sugar-free sweets, designed especially for the elderly in the region, who soon became her most loyal customers. The square where she sold her first brownies was now just a sweet memory, because the girl had grown up, and it grew without abandoning its essence. She was still smiling, curious, attentive, but now she was also firm, decisive, master of her own path. The space where there was once silence was now taken over by laughter, the smells of caramel, the sound of mixer, and lively conversations. The confectionery became a meeting point. People who had never talked to each other started to meet there, in line for famous brownie, or waiting for a piece of the lemon pie that she developed herself. With each compliment, the girl shone, not out of vanity, but because he realized that what he did touched others. It was more than food. It was welcoming. In the intense routine, she discovered the fatigue of a day full of orders, but also the pleasure of seeing the packages coming out one by one, with colorful bows and a card that she herself wrote by hand, made with love and hope. It wasn't just a pretty slogan. It was the truth that sustained every batch. Each candy was a symbol of overcoming. And, even with little time for herself, she made a point of talking to each customer, listening to stories, offering coffee and cake as if offering a hug. The businesswoman continued by her side, guiding, teaching, but increasingly admired by the girl's autonomy. She was a fast learner, solved problems with creativity, and had a rare sensitivity to deal with people. And as hard as life had been on her, her sweetness seemed intact. There was no room for heartache, just for gratitude. Gratitude for each person who reached out, for each night they endured with courage, for each morning they woke up determined not to give up. The success of the confectionery caught the attention of the city. Small local newspapers made reports, telling the story of overcoming that young entrepreneur. Some people traveled from distant neighborhoods just to get to know the sweets of the girl who conquered the street with courage and wheat flour. And, contrary to what many expected, she was not dazzled. He was still standing firm at the counter, serving with the same twinkle in his eyes as when he sold brownies in the recycled box. She began to employ other girls in the community, young people who, like her, needed a chance, each one with a story, some shy, others already too calloused, but all of them thirsty to learn. And she taught as she had learned, with patience, with humility, with her heart. He turned every mistake into a lesson, every hit into a celebration. And so, Dolce Esperanza became a school, not only confectionery, but life. Each week, new product appeared on the menu, always with a special touch. A pinch of memory, a trace of childhood, a memory of a square. Each recipe told a story. Some sweet, others not so much. But all true, like the biscuit stuffed with guava paste that he learned to make with a lady from the neighborhood, or the carrot cake with crunchy topping, inspired by the rainy days I spent looking at the windows of bakeries. Deep down, she knew that none of this would have been possible without the invisible force that pushed her every day. A strength made of faith, resilience, small miracles that disguised themselves as ordinary people. The girl now owned a world that she built herself with steady hands, bare feet, and a heart that never gave in to fear. But even with all this, there was still something inside, pulsating. Something she couldn't explain, but which was starting to grow differently. Something that went beyond sugar, pasta, and recipes. It was a silent desire, almost imperceptible at first, but which took shape every time she looked at those girls who now worked with her. It was as if, deep down, she knew that her mission was not yet complete, that there was more, much more. And at that moment when the bakery was full, the candy ready, the smell of vanilla in the air, and her hands full of icing, she felt she needed to follow this new calling. She still didn't know where it would take her, but the heart, which had already missed a beat so many times, now beat firmly, and she was ready to listen. The morning sun had barely reached the center of the square. It was already possible to smell a sweet and unmistakable perfume in the air, as if the whole city knew that this would not be an ordinary day. The first to arrive were the old neighbors, those who accompanied each stage of construction, each brushstroke on the walls, each unloaded box with utensils. Then came the curious faces, residents of other neighborhoods, people who read about her in the local newspaper, entire families who decided to start Sunday differently. Gradually, the square turned into a sea of people, as if everyone was there not just for a candy, but for a story. For her, in the window of Dolce Esperanza, everything gleamed. The brownies perfectly aligned, the cakes decorated with sugar blossoms, the pie slices shimmering in the soft light. Every detail had been thought out with care. The girl, wearing a white apron with pink details, trembled a little, not from fear, but from something bigger, something she had never felt before, the feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She took a deep breath. He looked around, and she saw familiar faces. The man who bought 2 brownies a day in the square, the girl who donated bags for her to pack the sweets, the boy who smiled whenever he received a gift wrapped in ribbon. They were all there, and they smiled with the kind of pride that can only be felt for those who have overcome the impossible. The businesswoman, discreetly next to her, just watched. That was her time. No one else could carry this moment. It was a girl who walked the path, endured the cold nights, balanced the whole world in a basket of sweets, and now she owned her own story. When the doorbell rang for the first time, her heart raced. A white-haired lady entered. He had a yellowed photo and an emotional smile in his hands. It was the same woman who, years ago, had given him a coin in the square and told him that his brownies were the best in the world. She held the girl's gaze for a few seconds before pointing to the simple brownie in the window, the same one, rolled with traditional sprinkles and placed in a blue mold. The girl picked at the candy with her slightly trembling hands, wrapped it carefully, and handed it over. The instant the hands touched was brief but eternal. A light silence spread through confectionery, as if everyone had felt, at the same time, the symbolic weight of that moment. It wasn't just a sale. It was a rite of passage. It was the end of one story and the beginning of another, a landmark, an invisible line separating what she had been from what she had become. She, who was once invisible among the benches of the square, was now the protagonist of a dream that could be touched, felt, tasted. The tears came without warning. They flowed hot, without embarrassment, as if washing every stone on the path that brought her there. She did not cry out of sadness. He cried for everything he endured, for everything he believed, for everything he refused to forget. I cried because that brownie, so simple and small, was the greatest victory anyone could carry in their hands. The audience, who watched everything in respectful silence, was moved together. One lady wiped her eyes discreetly. A man applauded slowly. And, without anyone agreeing, the applause spread. She, still teary-eyed, just smiled. A calm, mature smile of someone who understands that he has won, not because he got far, but because he didn't give up. Throughout the day, the confectionery remained full. Each candy delivered seemed to carry a part of its history. The brownies gained a new flavor, as if they had been seasoned with overcoming. Pies were more than desserts. They were witnesses to a transformation, and the girl, now a woman, walked around the room lightly, as if each step said, "I did it." The first sale opened the doors not only to the confectionery, but to something even deeper. For the first time, she felt whole. View, recognized not for piety, but for merit, and that changed everything. Because what she always sought was not charity, it was dignity. And now she had it. The newspapers came back, the photographers recorded, the videos spread. But deep down, none of this mattered as much as the sparkle in the eyes of the girl who, years before, had only a basket in her hands and a dream kept in her chest. Because now the dream was there, with the smell of chocolate, with a taste of victory, and with the name that translated everything she experienced. Hope. She spent the rest of the day smiling, welcoming, offering generous slices of cake as if offering a piece of herself. He did not refuse hugs, nor did he avoid questions. He told his story with simplicity, but with the strength of someone who faced storms with his head held high. And each person who entered that confectionery left differently, as if somehow he had taken more than one candy. He was taking a silent lesson in courage. As the afternoon progressed, the confectionery continued to pulsate. A constant buzz filled the room, mixed with the sound of spoons, laughter, the bell that rang every time someone new entered. And between one service and another, she still found time to look out the window and remember the square. From the bench where he slept, the first time he improvised a brownie with a can of condensed milk donated. And when I remembered, I felt no pain. I felt gratitude. Because that arduous path had become the most solid foundation he could have hoped for. His feet were now firm, not on a cement floor, but on something even stronger, the certainty that resisting was worth it, and that each moment of solitude served to build exactly that instant. At the end of the day, when the sun was already hiding behind the buildings, she sat for a few minutes at the back of the confectionery. He took a deep breath, took off his apron, and for a few seconds closed his eyes. Outside, there were still customers on the sidewalk. Children licking their fingers with chocolate. Couples laughing. Friends saying goodbye with pots in their hands. Sweet Hope had become more than a place. It was a symbol, and she knew it. I knew that now, more than ever, I needed to honor this space, to continue serving, welcoming, teaching, because what had started with a brownie in the square had now become a bridge between pain and reconstruction. And she, at the center of it all, felt a new call emerging, discreet but powerful. Still with her eyes closed, she smiled again. I knew that this was just the beginning, that first sale had changed everything, but that new paths were being drawn, and the heart, so accustomed to resisting, now learned to dream aloud. Over time, the confectionery was no longer just a place where sweets were sold. She became a true meeting point for those who sought not only a special flavor, but also a life story that touched deep in the soul of those who knew her. The small bakery, which at first was a lonely dream, was now filled with visitors who arrived from different places, all attracted by something beyond the brownies and cakes. They came in search of the person who represented the transformation. The girl who was once lost in the world, without a family, without a home, was now the woman who shared her experience with a welcoming smile and a word of encouragement. What was once just hard work to ensure survival now had a greater purpose. She was no longer just a pastry chef. She was proof that the pain, loss, and adversities of life do not have to be an end, but a turning point, a reconstruction. His story spread. Schools began to schedule visits to confectionery, not only to taste the sweets, but to hear the story of someone who, with courage and strength, had managed to get back on his feet when the world seemed to have closed all doors. It was a story of overcoming that many students needed, a story that showed them that no matter how much life knocks them down, there's always a possibility of getting back on their feet. And she became a living example of this possibility. The growing visibility of her trajectory also took her to other spaces. TV shows, in search of inspiring people, began to take an interest in her story. She, always with humility, accepted invitations and shared her journey with the whole country. Her eyes sparkled whenever she talked about her difficult childhood. But pain was no longer the center of the narrative. The focus now was on what she had achieved, on the strength she had discovered within herself, and, above all, on the importance of never abandoning hope, no matter what. "Never let the pain take away its sweetness," he repeated in each interview. And these words echoed in those who heard them. Her sweetness was what caught everyone's attention the most. She had not become embittered by life. On the contrary, she had learned to transform each difficulty into something that brought her closer to people. The abandonment she had experienced, and which many imagined would destroy her, was the fuel for her reconstruction. What could be seen as a weakness became his greatest strength. What was once humiliation and suffering, today was his flag of courage. His business was no longer just a means of livelihood. It was also a beacon for those lost in the darkness, a reminder that no matter how difficult the path, there was always a chance to start over. And it was this example that began to reach people of all ages and backgrounds. Young people who saw in confectionery not only a sweet, but the possibility of transforming their own lives. Children from poor neighborhoods, with few prospects, began to visit the store not only out of curiosity, but to see the woman who had been one of them. They saw the story of overcoming reflected in their image, and this lit a flame of hope in their hearts. She was no longer just a poor orphan girl. It had become a symbol that, even when circumstances are cruel, it is possible with effort to turn the tide. The people who arrived at Dolce Esperanza often did not leave with a simple request. They left carrying more than a brownie or a slice of cake, left with a new meaning for their own lives. Every smile she shared, every word of support she offered, turned into a seed planted in someone's heart, and little by little, her story became the motivation for others to follow their own dreams. She knew that. She knew she was no longer just a pastry chef. She had become an inspiration to others, a voice that not only spoke about overcoming, but that lived and breathed every word. She continued her work routine with the same commitment, but now she knew that her story, her example of life, could transform the suffering of others into a starting point for something new. She no longer saw herself as the orphan who sold brownies in the square. She was now the woman who helped others see that life, no matter how hard, had its value and its ups and downs, but was always worth fighting for. In the farthest corners of the city, she began to receive letters. Thank you letters. Letters from young people who told how their story had made them change their choices. Some of these letters came from young people who were about to give up on their own dreams, but who, upon hearing or reading about her trajectory, found the strength to move on. She was beginning to realize that her life had not been a simple accident, but a story with a greater purpose. Her pain, her challenges, her struggle, everything that seemed to be just suffering now made sense, because it had touched other lives in a way she could never have imagined. She had become, unwittingly, a leader of people's hearts, who guided them through a story of persistence, of seeking dignity, and of never giving up. The media came to see it not as a sad story of overcoming, but as an inspiring example of how, with courage and determination, anyone could rewrite their life. She became a role model not only for those who lived in difficulty, but also for those who, often without real difficulties, felt lost and aimless. She began to be invited to seminars and meetings on entrepreneurship, not only as a successful businesswoman, but as someone who represented the reinvention of life. The girl who started with a brownie basket was now a voice that resonated in the streets, in schools, and in the media, reminding everyone that, no matter how long the night, the light always came. Every visit to the confectionery shop was now an event. No matter what people asked, what they really wanted was a piece of that story, a little piece of the girl who didn't give up and instead used every obstacle as a platform for her growth. She, who once felt invisible, was now seen and admired, not for her skill with sweets, but for her example of life. And this, more than any secret recipe, was the real secret of success. Her trajectory, which began with pain, had turned into a narrative of rebirth. And with that, she knew she was just beginning. The future opened up before her, full of new possibilities. And in the meantime, she continued to work in confectionery, serving more than sweets. She served hope. If you have come this far, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know that each story of overcoming touches in a unique way. And if you stayed until the end, it's because something of this message resonated with you. If this story was for you, tell me in the comments with "this message was for me." I'd love to know what touched you the most. And if you like the content, don't forget to leave that like. It helps us know that you're really connected to that message, and it gets more people find videos like this one that are full of inspiration. Now, if you're feeling that you still have more to learn and connect with life stories that bring light, there's a video here on the side that talks about a very similar theme, with another story of overcoming that will inspire you. Click there and stay with me. Remember, life can surprise us when we least expect it, and every small gesture of kindness can have a huge impact. What are you going to do with your power today?